Hello, my name is Amanda Natalie, and I'm going to be presenting my EDOL 647 signature assessment, and it is titled Grading for Equity. So the first thing I want to go over with you is really just table of contents. So where can you find everything in this presentation? So starting with the next slide, slide 3 is going to be our meeting agenda. Then I'm going to go over my personal vision statement with you. We have a discussion question, and then slide 6 is PLC projects parts 1 and 2. 7 is problem is identified. 8, strategy selected, then the implementation of the strategy. And then slide 10, the changes made or the implementation 2, data analysis on 11, next steps and reflections. How can this work? And that's a wrap. So our meeting agenda for today is, again, introduction of my personal vision statement, identifying the problem with current grading system in the classroom, and then the PLC project, 4 essential questions. What do we want our students to know? How will we know if they've learned it? How do we respond when they don't learn? And how do we give enrichment opportunities to those who have learned it? And these are the 4 basic questions that a PLC should be able to answer. So we're going to identify a strategy. We're going to implement that strategy. We're going to tweak it, make some changes to it. And then we're going to look forward and next steps. What might we need to do in the future? So first of all, my personal vision statement is to promote equity in grading for all students. Equitable grading strives to remove teacher bias, either intentional or unintentional, promote accuracy and meaningfulness in each student's grade by excluding non-academic grades and by using a fair grading scale, and help to teach students the connection between how doing homework and classwork is valuable in that it increases learning. So basically, I want my grades to be meaningful. I want to take out the things that do not give me an indication of how well a student knows a standard and only put in my grade book the things that point to mastery of standards. So the first question, or the question, I guess, we're going to take a moment just to reflect on the following question. What do you put in your grade book to measure a student's learning? And do you have grades that are not based on standards? Now, we all do it, or we all have done it. I know I have certainly done it. Attendance or participation. And really, these are just ways of controlling student behavior, but they don't point to mastery of a standard. There is no standard that says, oh, the student came to class every day, or the student participated in discussions, or the student didn't just put his head down and sleep. And so these things, although they're so ingrained in the way that we have traditionally graded, are not gradable things because they do not point to how much a student has learned. So the PLC project, my PLC project, part 1, identify a problem within the classroom, and I've done that. I've identified my problem as how I calculate grades. Select a strategy or intervention to implement, and then plan how that strategy and article will be used in your classroom. Then part 2, write the intervention with feedback, changes, etc., summarize and analyze the data, and then reflect on next steps. So, problem in my classroom. Many of the grades that were used to calculate student final grades are not based on any standard and include things like attendance, effort, participation, etc. The problem with this is that some students are going to have grades that are higher than they should be, grades that don't reflect their learning because they behave well, they do what we tell them to do. And then other students are going to have deflated grades because their behavior is not so good. And by behavior, I mean things like participation and did you do your homework and all of these things. That is behavior. Now, grades are often not as good of an indication of a student's progress because students who are good at checking those things off, like I did my homework, I came to class, I participated in discussions, I did this, I did that. There's some points. I grabbed those points for my grade. Some students who really haven't learned anything but are good at those behaviors will have artificially higher grades. And then other students who aren't good at that don't check things off well, that don't do homework, that maybe come to class late, they might have artificially lower grades because those items are factored into the grade book. Okay, so the strategy that I selected is really just eliminate the non-assessment grades in the grade book. Get rid of them. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages, the grade obtained that the student gets is an accurate representation of student mastery of a topic. The personal feelings about a student don't factor into a student's grades. Now, I know none of us like to think that we give preferential treatment, but we do. We like some students better than others. And if we have two students, A and B, with a 58%, and student A is lazy, we think, they don't do their homework, they come to class late, they're not doing the things that they're supposed to do, well, sorry, you got a 58. And then student B over here, they come to class, they participate in discussions, they do their homework. The natural inclination is, well, I'm just going to bump him up to a 60 because his effort, he's working so hard. That's what I'm talking about when I say teacher bias. Now, another advantage is you can easily see what standards are mastered and which ones still need work. And that's really going to be in the way that you structure your assessments. You will be able to give more meaningful feedback. Like, it seems that you are struggling with this concept or with this idea, instead of you did a great job on that or you could have done better here. It does help us to give more meaningful feedback, and it promotes a growth mindset. So instead of, here's the assessment, you did poorly, that's too bad, we're going to move on, then we can say, here's the assessment, you didn't do as well as you expected, let's see why. Did you do your homework? Did you participate in discussions? And then we give them an opportunity to relearn and then retake. Now, disadvantages, it can be time consuming. Not going to lie to you, it can be. You have to structure your assessments so that you can see what standards are being taught and learned. You give the opportunity for a retake after learning. It can be time consuming, and it does require a shift in thinking for both the student and the teacher. Students are very used to, oh, bombed that one, let's move on to the next one. Teachers are also used to that. But this requires a shift. Instead of saying it is too late for you to learn that, this method is saying you haven't learned it yet. And so that is a big shift in mindset. So implementation, how did it go? First implementation, first thing I did was I took out the attendance and the participation out of the grade book. Had nothing to do with the standards that I was teaching, just took them out. Now, the first reaction to that was I was questioned. Students wanted to know why am I doing this? Why is everything going to be more based on assessment? But after I explained it to them, a lot of them were pretty receptive. Now, what I found was that some students just stopped coming to class because it wasn't part of their grade anymore. And keep in mind that this is during non-traditional, this is during virtual classes. So some kids just didn't come, wasn't part of their grade. And then what happened was they would have trouble with their assessment, or they would have trouble with the homework, which was practice for the assessment, and they couldn't quite figure out why. Now, of course, we know why. It's because you're not coming to class. So they eventually made that connection between class attendance and grades. If I come to class and I do these things, I will perform better. And so it's a cause and effect relationship, which is actually one of my 8th grade science standards. So I am teaching them a standard just by this as well. Now, the changes that I made to this, I did tweak this after the first little implementation. I eliminated the use of anything for grading that didn't assess learning of a standard. So nothing in there, no fluff, no, oh, here's a prompt, answer this, I'm going to grade that and put it in the grade book. Just took it out. Now, things out of the student's control, which was, do they have help at home? Do they have a quiet place to do their homework? They weren't factored into the grade, because we know that some students really just can't do homework for whatever reason. They don't have an adult to help. They don't understand it. They may not have a place to do it. They may have responsibilities outside of school, like taking care of siblings. So those things that the student couldn't control were mitigated. They were taken out of their grade. And also, I don't give extra credit. I used to. I think we all have at some point or another. But I don't give extra credit, because the work that I give will help you with the assessment. It is learning. It is based on learning that standard. If I give extra credit, it may just be something random. And so if you want extra credit, well, you're just going to have to do the regular credit. I'm still not going to give you extra credit, but it doesn't minimize the importance of what I'm teaching. If I give you extra credit for going to see a movie and writing something up, that what I'm telling you is that my stuff that I'm teaching you is not that important. You can just do this instead. when in reality, everything that we're teaching them is important. Students were then given the opportunity to redo assessments. So if we didn't do well on an assessment, well, let's figure out why. We seem to have we're having trouble understanding these concepts. So let's look at why. So if you keep a record of homework done, we can go back and look. Oh, well, you didn't do the homework that would have taught you this standard. So let's go back and do it, and then you can retake the assessment. So instead of just giving them retake, and then it's like, look, okay, I got it right that time, I missed it this time. No, there has to be learning that takes place in between those retakes. And then no zeros were given for incomplete or missing assignments or assessments. This is a big one, and it is really, really hard to wrap your head around. I totally understand that. But we have dedicated 59 out of 100 points on our traditional grading scale to failing. We have given you 59 different ways to fail, but we've only given you 10 ways to get a D or a C or a B or an A. So it's not a balanced scale. Now, sometimes we will grade things, or you'll see things graded on a 0 to 4. 0 is failing, 1 is a D, 2 is a C, and so on and so forth. So what I've done, instead of giving a 0 if you just didn't do anything, so I'll give you a 50. And the reason for that is you still failed it. It doesn't matter if you failed it by 10 points or 50 points. It is failing. It's really, really hard to make up a 0. Not as hard to make up a 50. And so that is the reason for that. I'd be happy to go into that further if you like. But we are going to move on to the data analysis portion. So after collecting and evaluating data over 2 grading periods, I noticed that the grades that my students received were more accurate reflections of what they were learning. I didn't have the fluff in there, and I didn't have the penalties in there for not doing homework. Some kids are going to need that practice of homework. Some kids are just going to pick it up, or they're going to know it. Other kids need that practice. And so it's unfair to penalize kids for having to go through the motions and to do something that they already understand. Let's see. Some students' grades were actually raised because not doing homework didn't reflect negatively in their grade. And students did begin to understand, hey, this is practice for you. This is to help you. All right, the next slide, reflection next steps. So after implementing these strategies, I did notice that more students actually did take advantage of the redo opportunities. So more students would want, oh, I didn't do as well as I thought I did. I want to go back and retake it. The important part here is that's great, but there needs to be some evidence of learning before I'll let you retake it. Otherwise, you're just throwing darts at a dartboard and seeing what sticks. I did note that it took a little bit more effort on my part because of the additional grading, and possible next steps for my classroom. I want to make more of an effort to go over the homework and the classwork before the assessment, to check for understanding before the assessment, and then more thoroughly go over the assessment after all the students have had an opportunity to redo it if they wanted to. Okay, now you might be asking, how can this work? So there are lots of different ways to do standards-based grading, and one method is to grade everything on a 0 to 4 scale, where 4 is exceeds expectations, 3 is meets, 2 is approaching, 1 is below, and 0 is just didn't attempt it. Now, I chose to not do that because that is just one more thing for the kids and the parents, honestly, to wrap their heads around. So what I chose to do instead is I changed my grading scale to 50 to 100. So anything below 60 is a U. It's failing. 60 to 69 is a D, and it follows the traditional grading scale that students and parents are actually familiar with. So there was less confusion on exactly what does this 3 mean that I got on this assessment. Instead, oh, I got a B. They understand that. So I found that students and parents understood this scale a whole lot better. And then when a student had a grade in the 50s instead of in the 20s, they were much more likely to do some work to increase that score. It is so much easier to bump your score up from a 55 to a 60 than it is from a 20 to a 60. It's virtually impossible to do that. And so in a nutshell, I mean, that is a wrap. So the goal of this project plan was to make students' grades more indicative of their learning. And I think that I've accomplished that. It's still a work in progress, though. It's not quite finished yet. Now, I wanted to eliminate the standard practice of identifying those 59 different ways that a student could fail an assessment and to make the grading scale and the practices more equitable. I didn't want to penalize students for situations out of their control, things that they couldn't control. Now, admittedly, this plan of action is a little bit more time consuming than traditional grading. You're going to have to be a little bit more flexible and, okay, they didn't get it, let's reteach them. And this goes in with the whole PLC plan of what do we want them to know? How will we know if they've learned it? Well, through the assessment, we'll know if they've learned it. What do we do if they didn't learn it? We're going to go back. We're going to reteach, give them an opportunity for more learning, and let them retake it. Now, on the other end of that scale is, what if a kid got it? What if they did great on the assessment? Then you can provide them with opportunities to take that knowledge to the next level, some higher order thinking. Now, it is difficult to wrap your head around giving a score of a 50 for no work. I totally understand that. But when you think that is failing, and I'm not rounding up. If a kid gets 59.5, it rounds to a 60. 59.4 does not. So what that says to that student is you are going to have to learn a little bit more. So let's go back and look at this, learn a little more, retake it, and you get your score up. I'm not giving you your grade, you're earning your grade. Now, the results were very gratifying, and I do believe that my grades are aligned more with what the kids are learning after I have implemented this. And it is a learning curve for me and for the students, but in the end, I think it is going to be a much better way to grade. So I hope that you have enjoyed my presentation and you have a great day.